The emergency klaxon screamed through the xenobiology wing of Station Kepler 442, its piercing wail designed to wake even the deepest sleeper. Red lights strobed across the reinforced glass of the containment nursery, painting the walls in urgent crimson pulses. The Velkar cubs didn't even twitch. 7 of them lay curled together in their heated nest, their chitinous plates rising and falling with the slow rhythm of deep sleep. These were apex predators in larval form, creatures whose adult variants could tear through reinforced steel and whose senses could detect a heartbeat from 3 corridors away. Their hearing was so acute that researchers had to wear dampening collars just to enter their enclosure without causing distress, yet the siren that would rupture a human's eardrums barely registered in their consciousness. Mira stood at the observation window, one hand pressed against the glass, her other hovering over the manual override panel. The station's AI had detected a containment breach in Sector 7. Something had gotten loose from the deep holding cells. Protocol demanded immediate lockdown of all xenobiological specimens, but Mira hesitated. She knew what the others didn't. She'd spent 6 months as the primary caretaker for these cubs, ever since they'd been rescued from a dying colony ship. The Velkar were extinct in the wild now, hunted to annihilation by a dozen species who feared what they might become. These 7 represented the last of their kind, and they trusted her. Dr. Xanthor, the Centaurian station director, had called it dangerous anthropomorphization. The Velshek security chief had filed 3 formal complaints about her lax protocols. But Mira had seen what the instruments couldn't measure, and what the reports couldn't capture. The cubs knew her. Footsteps, they knew her breathing, they knew her presence in a way that defied their species, documented behavior patterns. The siren continued to wail. Mira's communicator buzzed with increasingly urgent messages. The breach was spreading. Station security was mobilizing. She needed to engage the containment field and evacuate to the safe zones. Instead, she took one quiet step backward. 7 pairs of eyes snapped open instantly. Rock lifted his head first, his sensory antennae unfurling like delicate flowers. The eldest cub, barely 4 months old but already the size of a full-grown wolf, fixed his multifaceted gaze directly on Mira through the glass. Not on the flashing lights, not toward the deafening alarm, on her. The other 6 cubs stirred immediately after, responding not to the environmental chaos but to Rock's alertness. Their attention oriented as one toward the human woman who hadn't made a sound, who hadn't triggered any sensor, who had simply shifted her weight from one foot to the other. Mira felt her throat tighten. Even now, even after months of data, it still amazed her. The Velkar cubs could sleep through a Category 5 emergency alert, a sound literally engineered to be impossible to ignore. But they woke the instant she moved. Not when the Centaurian researchers entered. Not when the automated feeding systems activated. Not when maintenance drones clattered through the adjacent corridors. Only when she did. Through the glass, Rock chirped softly. It was a sound that shouldn't have been audible over the siren, but Mira heard it clearly. The other cubs added their voices, creating a cascade of questioning trills that somehow cut through the mechanical screaming. They weren't afraid of the alarm. They were asking where she was going. Mira, the communicator crackled with Dr. Xanthor's strained voice. Containment breach has reached Sector 5. You need to lock down that nursery and evacuate now. Her finger hovered over the emergency containment button. One press would flood the nursery with a sedative aerosol, harmless but effective, keeping the cubs unconscious and safely contained while the crisis was resolved. But she thought about the data she'd been collecting. The readings that made no sense according to established xenobiology. The Velkar weren't supposed to be capable of this kind of selective perception. Their neurological structure didn't support the complex social bonding observed in pack species. According to every scientific model, they should have been responding to the objective threat. The loud noise, the flashing lights, the chemical signature of station-wide panic. They weren't. They were responding to her. Mira made her decision. She pressed her palm flat against the glass. Rock immediately approached, his own foreclaw meeting hers from the other side, separated by 6 inches of transparent composite. The other cubs clustered around him, their attention focused with laser precision on their human caretaker. I'm not leaving you. Mira said quietly. The cubs settled almost immediately. Not completely. Rock kept his antennae extended, monitoring her, but the anxious chirping ceased. They trusted her assessment of the situation more than their own sensory input. That's when Mira understood something that would take the scientific community another decade to accept. Humans weren't just another species to the Velkar cubs. Humans were signal. In a universe of noise, of sirens, and lights and chaos, human presence was the only frequency that mattered. Not because humans were louder or brighter or more threatening, because humans had learned to be significant. 3 hours later, when the containment breach was resolved and the station returned to normal operations, Dr. Xanthor found Mira still at the observation window. The cubs were curled together again, deeply asleep despite the continuing foot traffic of security sweeps. "You should have evacuated," the Centaurian said, though his tone carried more curiosity than censure. Mira glanced at Rock, whose antennae twitched slightly in his sleep, still tracking her even in dreams. "If I had," she replied, "they would have known something was really wrong. And then you would have had 7 panicked Velkar cubs to deal with along with everything else." Dr. Xanthor's bioluminescent patches flickered in what Mira had learned to recognize as contemplation. He pulled up the nursery's sensor logs on his datapad, studying the timeline. The cubs' stress indicators never elevated, he observed, not once during the entire crisis. He looked at Mira with something approaching wonder. "Because you stayed calm." "Because I stayed," Mira corrected gently. Later, in her personal log, Mira would write, "We keep trying to understand alien species through the framework of threat detection, resource competition, and survival instinct. But maybe the real question isn't what they sense, it's what they choose to notice. The Velkar cubs can hear everything. They just don't care about the noise. They care about the signal, and somehow we humans have become their signal in a very loud universe." Rock stirred slightly in his sleep, one antenna rotating toward her. Mira smiled and settled into her chair. She wasn't going anywhere.